king of the hot hatches is back. Yes, this is the brand new 2024 Mercedes-AMG A45S. You want to know what it's like, don't you? Well, I'll put you out your misery. It is a lot like the old one.
And you might think that's a huge shame, especially as this might be the last ever A45, at least in its current form. But the bodywork is exactly the same. The engine is the same 2-litre 4-cylinder, power and torque are the same, top speed is the same, but sometimes same isn't really the end of the world.
Honestly, same is actually pretty good in this case because I have never got into an AMG A45S and thought, this car needs more power. It's just not gonna happen. It's got a monster of an engine, 2-litre, making 420 horsepower, 500 Newton meters. This thing absolutely flies.
So it's still fast then, but surely something must have changed. This is what you call a facelift, meaning most of the tweaks are cosmetic, but you have to look very hard to see them. It now has slightly different headlights. The previous car had L-shaped DRLs, while these are now in a simpler straight line. This model now has the Autotrader badge on the bonnet instead of the Mercedes 3-pointed star, and at the back, the rear lights have been updated with a new design. Aside from that, it uses the same wheel options, the same tyres, and the same paint colours. Somewhat disappointing? Maybe, because this might be the only facelift where a car manufacturer hasn't actually updated the face.
Luckily, there are a fair few changes on the inside. Let's start with the steering wheel. That's new. This is actually the wheel you get on the E63, among other high-end AMG models, and it looks great, a lot better than the kind of fake metallic effect on the previous steering wheel. There is a problem with this wheel though, and that is that some of these buttons are capacitive and they're very easy to press accidentally when you're driving. For example, the volume button is very easy to slide up and down by accident. You can call people by accident. You can activate the cruise control by accident. Looks great, but usability wise, not perfect. Also, it's got the latest version of Mercedes-Benz's MBUX system, this infotainment system, but with a big change. Now it's controlled almost entirely by touchscreen or via the capacitive buttons on the steering wheel. In the past, this had a mouse trackpad on the center console, and they've gotten rid of that and they've just left a kind of empty gap now. And I don't quite know what the purpose of this particular space is because it's not big enough for a mobile phone, certainly not my phone. It's not secure enough for your spare change, and it's not big enough for any cups because you've got cup holders just in front of that. It's a slightly awkward design and I can't quite work out what it's for. Elsewhere, these seats are quite nice, very supportive, they look good. I wouldn't personally go for this yellow effect. The leather, not the highest quality in the world, but it's passable. Is it passable actually on a 63 grand car? Not sure. But you've got 64 different ambient light colors to choose from, and generally, it's an okay cabin. Certainly among the best in the hot hatch sector.
A quick word on practicality and build quality. The rear is pretty spacious, the boot is larger than what you get in the new C63, and the perceived build quality is a little questionable in places. For example, on the fake air intake at the front, not to mention the aero kit, which looks great, but especially with that rear wing, is a little bit too wobbly for my liking.
Is it befitting a car at this price point? I'll let you decide, but I'll tell you what is befitting: the performance. The engine in the A45S is the legendary M139, still the most powerful 2-litre production engine in the world. I'll recap the stats for you. 421 horsepower, 500 Newton meters, 0 to 62 in 3.9, and a VMAX of around 170 miles an hour. The torque is incredible in this car. The acceleration, regardless of what you're doing or where you're doing it or what the weather's like, is outrageous. There isn't another hot hatch that I can think of, certainly not one made today, that shifts as quickly as this thing. It's a beast. One of the coolest things about this car, I think, is the sound it makes, especially on the inside. Have a listen to this. You get these pops and bangs on the downshift, on the upshift. I say the sound is good on the inside because I've spoken to my cameraman and he says that it doesn't sound amazing on the outside. So clearly what they've done here is they've upped their game when it comes to making fake noise from the speakers. I think a lot of it is coming from the speakers at the rear, so it does a fantastic job of pretending that it's making actual noise, when in reality, it's not. But I'm actually not mad at that because so many cars are virtually silent these days. Actually having a car that makes some form of noise, well, it's a bit refreshing really, even if it isn't real.
Power flows through that very impressive 8-speed dual clutch gearbox, which has paddles that feel good and a mostly responsive shift up and down the ratios.
When it first came out, the A45 felt a little bit flat-footed compared to the best rivals. For example, the Golf GTR, I think, would run rings around the A45. It just didn't quite engage you quite as much in the bends, but over time, AMG's actually improved this car, and now it's a lot of fun in the corners. It doesn't feel quite as alive in the hands as a front-wheel drive hot hatch. There's a little bit of understeer when you push towards the limits, but there's a surprising amount of feel in the steering. It's actually a car that rewards you the more you push it. The faster you drive it, the better it becomes. I think the chassis is quite playful as well. If you go looking for it, there's a little bit of lift-off oversteer, but importantly, this is a car that can also power oversteer. AMG's 4MATIC Plus all-wheel drive system can send 50% of the power to the rear and then send 100% of that 50% to one side or the other to allow you to actually get a little bit of oversteer in the bends or just drive it through a corner and make it feel a lot more rear biased than a lot of cars in its class. I think that's one of the things I love about the A45. It's got its own feel. It doesn't feel anything like a Focus ST or a Golf GTI. It's its own breed of hot hatch. It's unique. You gotta give credit where it's due because let's face it, this isn't AMG's domain. They went from competing with the likes of BMW M and Porsche to deciding one day that they wanted to compete with the likes of Renault Sport or Ford with their ST brand or Golf GTIs. And even though they didn't nail it first time out, the A45 evolved, got better, and what we've ended up with is this amazing hot hatch that is like nothing else. It's brutally fast, faster than anything else that you'd consider a rival, and also it's tremendously fun to drive.
The suspension on the new A45 hasn't changed, but then it didn't need to. It still has the same adaptive dampers that allow for decent comfort in the softest setting, yet a firmer but still very drivable setup in Sport, Sport Plus and Race.
I guess you could be slightly disappointed in the fact that Mercedes haven't really gone to town with this latest version of the A45. If you've already driven an A45 or you already own one, there really isn't any excuse for you to go and buy this over what you've already seen. But it's nice that the A45 actually even still exists, because rumor has it that Mercedes will actually kill off the A-Class in a couple of years' time. This might be the last update to the A45 we'll ever see.
And that would be a real shame, because it is still to this day one of my favourite hot hatches. And in modern times, it's one of my favourite AMG cars full stop. More engaging and more fun even than the new C63. If you're looking for a compact car with plenty of power, tons of engagement and lots of personality, there aren't many better than this.